Hello. In this video, we are going to learn how to calculate the implied yield 2 years out for Germany. So right now it's 2022 when I'm making this video. And if we want to find out what would be the yield for let's say a 10-year German bond in 2024, how do we do that, right? And so for us to do that, there are many things that we need to know. So I have broken those things down into 5 steps. So the first step is we need to understand the basics and build an intuition as to what is a spot rate, what is a forward rate, which is an implied yield is nothing but a forward rate, and then some examples. Once we do that and once we've built a basic terminology, then we can try to build a generalized formula as to what and how do we calculate an implied yield for a future period. And then we will look at examples. We will probably pull up German bank yield curve data and find out what are the spot rates that they are giving today. Then we will look at, okay, once we have looked at the spot rates, how can we calculate the implied yield 2 years out? And after that, we can calculate, okay, if the yield is 2 years out is something and what it is today for 2 years out is something else, then we can see if there is a profit making opportunity. So I know I've mentioned several things here, but let's build it slowly so that we can actually build it together. Yeah. So step by step, these are the 5 steps. I gave you an overview. I'm going to go into each of those steps now in detail. So the first step we need to understand is like, what is a spot rate? Spot rate is basically an interest rate or a yield. Interest rate is nothing but a yield that is available today, right now, for a bond that's maturing into the future. So for example, if I say spot rate for a 1-year bond, right? And I'm assuming a zero coupon bond. Basically, that means that the bond doesn't pay you any coupon, just to simplify it. So let's assume a zero coupon bond. And I want to find out for that bond 1 year from now, how much is the spot rate. So let's say I say the spot rate R1 is 5%. By that, what I mean is, if I were to invest in time t equals 0 and I hold that bond for a 1 year time, at the end of that year I will get R1 5% yield, or a spot rate of 5% means I will get a 5% interest for holding a bond for 1 year. So far with me? So R1 is how we denote spot rates. R is nothing but rate of interest, so R. So now when we say R2 equals 6%, that means this is a spot rate or an interest rate of 6% is what you get for holding a bond for 2 years. So annually you get 6%. So R2 is 6%, meaning for this whole duration, R2 means 2 years. For 2 years, you will get every year a 6% return. So now we understand what a spot rate is. The key thing is these are rates as of today. That's the key. These are the rates available if you go into the market or ask the central bank, hey, what is the interest rate you're willing to pay me if I give you money and buy your bonds? They will say today, or the spot rate is X. In this case, whatever the rate is, they'll tell us, right? So spot rate is nothing but a rate for right now. That's all we need to remember. Rate for today. For what? A year into the future is R1. 2 years into the future is R2. So basically, for every year, if I give you 6%, for 2 years, I say my spot rate for a 2-year bond is 6%, meaning I will give you 6% every year, right, for 2 years. So if we now understand spot rate, which is basically today's rate for the future locking of the money that we can give, then we can start to understand like what is a forward rate. So a forward rate is nothing but an interest that you will get that's implied from the spot rate sometime into the future. So let's take an example. A forward rate is denoted by R1, 2, which basically says at time equals 1, and if I hold a maturity, a bond that matures at time 2, so starting at time 1, ending at time 2, what is the rate, right? So I'm standing here at time 1, right? That's where I'm standing. I'm standing at time 1, but I still want to predict, hey, if this person was into the future by 1 year, what would be the interest rate that they would get after a year? That's implied in today's terms. Basically, this piece here, right, in red, is the spot rate. It's basically starting t equals 1 till t equals 2, what is my interest rate, right? And so a forward rate is basically the interest rate at starting time 1 into the future, not right now, it's the future. That's the key. Forward rates are forward, meaning they're into the future. So what's the future rate that I will get in a year for a bond that matures a year after t equals 1 in this case? So that's a future rate. So spot rate, today's rate starting right now, forward rate, future rate starting sometime into the future. That's it. If we understand the spot rate for today, forward rate for the future, that's all we need to understand. And we need to understand what this nomenclature is, right? We said R12 is basically interest rate that I will get starting year 1 into the future, yeah, for a bond that matures at year 2. So now if we understand this, we can derive this is basically RTM, which is nothing but a generalized version of R12, which basically says, hey, at time t and until m years, what is the interest rate that I will get? That is my future forward rate, or forward rate, simple terms. Yeah, so it's forward rate is nothing but interest rate starting year t, RTM, into the future for holding a bond m years into the future, yeah, that matures at m years. Yeah, so now we understand spot rate, we understand forward rate. These are basic terminologies. Without this, it's be very hard for us to build this. Yeah, so once we understand these two, now let's take a simple example. Yeah, R1 is given to us. So remember R1, this is a spot rate, right, meaning of 5%. That means if this is that, right, starting right now, if I buy a German bond, let's take an example of Germany, I get 5%. R2 is 7%, meaning for 2 years I'll get 7% return of spot rate right now. See, these are all starting right now. So the person is right now here. So these are spot rates, R1 and R2. And then it's asking us to calculate the implied R12, which is our forward rate, right? R12 is our forward rate. It's basically this red thing here, right? It's asking us to calculate in these two spot rates, R1 and R2, what is the implied rate, right? Because someone can buy a bond today and they can buy a bond again in a year, or they can buy a bond today for 2 years. Should be the same, right? So there is some implied rate that starts at T1 and ends at T2 that should be derivable from these two spot rates, So from spot rates, if we can derive the forward rates, that's the key. And we can do that with this simple example. We know through compounding that 1 plus R1, which is the interest that you get for 1 year, times 1 plus R12, which is interest for the next year, would be the interest that it should be for buying a bond right now for 2 years, right? So with this, we know we can calculate R12, right? We substitute R1 as 5%, R12 as R2 as 7%, and we get R12 as 9%. So basically it's saying for a spot rate of 5% R1 and the spot rate of 7% R2, the implied forward rate R12 is 9%, meaning a person would make the same amount of money if they bought a bond today at 5% R1 and then again into the future at 9% R12, or they buy a bond right now for 2 years at 7%. They're the same. So once we do this, we know through compounding we can actually build so to summarize, holding a bond now for 7% a year for 2 years, which is this R2, is same as holding a bond now at 5% for a year and then again buying another bond for 9%, right? So you are actually getting a 9% in year 2 based on these two spot rates. Yeah. So we are able to find the implied rate here from current spot rates. So that's the key insight. If we are given R1 and R2, we can calculate R12 from it. So now we can build a general formula, right? Using this exact same equation, we can build a general formula below. So what's the general formula? R1 plus RTN raised to n equals 1 plus RT plus m comma n minus m raised to n minus m times 1 plus RT comma m raised to m. The only variable that I have introduced here is this time variable t, and you will see that I have used t equals 0 in an example. It's basically the same as what we saw earlier, right? So from a 12-year spot rate and a 10-year spot rate, we can get an implied 2-year forward yield. That's what we want to calculate. Remember, we wanted to calculate in 2024 what would be the 2-year forward yield for Germany. And we can do that using two spot rates, a 10-year spot rate and a 12-year spot rate, right? And we can calculate that. So now so the way we do that is we make t equals 0, right? And then we make m equals 2 and n equals 12, right? If we do that, then we get if we make n equals 10, n equals 12, we can get a 12-year spot rate from German bank data. And if we make m equals 2, then we can get this second equation here, and then we can calculate this third piece, which is the implied 2-year yield. So we have built a generalized formula. So that's going to be helpful for us to build a 2-year forward rate. Same thing we can do for a 1-year forward rate or whatever we want. We can substitute these variables. Yeah. So now let's look at and find out like what is our 10-year spot rate and a 12-year spot rate. Remember, that's our term 1 and term 2. We need these two to get term 3, which is a 2-year forward yield. So for that, we need to go and look at the German bank data. The place where we get that is through the German bank website. So bundesbank.de, you go to statistics, then you go to money and capital markets and interest rate and yields. Once you go there, you will see term structure of interest rates, right? So it basically gives you the data for what the German bank is willing to give you, and then go to tables and you get the daily term structure on listed foreign securities. So it gives you future spot rates for all of these years. So I'm going to use an example of, so now we know how to reach here, right? And I had calculated this, and so I had calculated this example as of June 27th, which is just a few days back. So I'm going to use that data from here. So what we needed was a 12-year spot rate. So we go to page 2, right? Because page 2 has a 12-year spot rate. This is the year. And it tells you for a given day. So every day this data is updated. So it says, oh, it's 1.58%. So take a note of this, right? So 12-year spot rate is 1.58%. And then we needed what? A 10-year spot rate, right? So we had a 10-year spot rate of 1.5, and then we needed a 2-year, right? M equals 2, so 2-year spot rate. Right. So what we do is we have a 2-year spot rate of 0.81. So remember these 3 data points. So 2-year spot rate of 0.81, 10-year spot rate of 1.5, and a 12-year spot rate of 1.58. Yeah. So now we know how to get this data. Let's go back. Yeah. So here we know this data now, right? So we saw this data. We have 0.81% for a 2-year spot rate, 1.58 for a 12-year spot rate. So we have 1 and 3. We have term 1 and 3 of this equation. 1, 2, 3. We needed to calculate term 2, right? So all we do is we substitute that in this equation, and I have just made x, which represents all of this thing as x, right? If I make this whole thing as x and we substitute t equals 0, n equals 12, m equals 2, then we will get this equation, and we substitute this interest rate. So 1.58% is 0.0158, so you have to change the percent to a number, and same for 0.81%. So then we can get our 210, right? So it's the implied forward 2-year out rate of 1.73%, right? So we get an implied forward of 1.73%, right? So that's the key learning, right? So we now have built the formula, and we have substituted it and gotten the interest rate that's implied. So if we were to wait 2 years from now, we would get an interest rate of 1.73%, right? And what is a 10-year spot rate? So now we've calculated that, hey, in Germany, you will get, if you were to wait for 2 years in 2024, the implied from the current spot rates, the implied yield is 1.73%, right? But what is the 2-year today? 12-year today, right? 12-year today is 1.58. 10-year today is 1.50, right? And 2 years is 0.81, right? So basically, we are now comparing, like, hey, look, this 1.5 10 years from now, after 2 years, that will become 1.73. That's what's implied, meaning in 2 years, the 10-year rate will go up. Even though the 10-year rate today is 1.5, the implied from the current spot rates is that the 10-year in 2 years from now will be 1.73. That means the market is expecting the 10-year yields to go up. Now the question is, so that's the implied. So that now we've successfully calculated. So the question now for us is like, hey, is there a profit-making opportunity here? So the way you do that is to find out, like, hey, the market's expecting the 10-year yields to go up. Under what scenarios the yields will not go up? And so the way you look at it is you look at various macro indicators. IMF publishes a lot of good qualitative insights that you can use to find out macro conditions in a country. So the way you do that is you Google for IMF staff country reports, and then you look for Article 4 consultation, right? Article 4 consultations. Basically, each of these countries that are part of the are part of IMF or take help from IMF, they have to release a lot of information, and so IMF does a great job. And then if you calculate, if you use this PDF, you can actually get a lot of qualitative information about how the macro situation is in Germany. And same you can do for Italy, Spain, or whichever country, and look at some of their numbers. Look at how they're progressing in terms of output, unemployment, prices, inflation, money penetration, exchange rate, currency. They also give you some key issues. So once you go through all of this, you will, and even if you read the first context, you will quickly know what is the current impact that they're going through: COVID, vaccination, GDP growth. And so IMF publishes a lot of this macro qualitative indicators that you can use. Same is for OECD. And if you feel that the interest rate will not go up based on everything we've learned, then this is an opportunity. Then you can actually short it right now and actually make money. But this requires a lot of things to work in your favor. So that's how you could make an argument as to, hey, will this be a profit making opportunity or not? So that's the reason why folks calculate an implied forward yield, forward rate from current spot rates. Thanks.